Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today, we're diving into a really fascinating, and let's be honest, a pretty controversial topic. We're going to be ranking the 10 most disastrous leaders in American history. Now, what does disastrous even mean? It's subjective, right? For this list, we're looking at presidents whose actions or inactions led to significant crises, deep national divisions, major economic downturns, or a serious erosion of public trust. This isn't about personal dislike. It's about the tangible negative impacts of their presidencies. We'll be counting down from number 10 all the way to the number 1 spot. Do you have any guesses who might be on this list? Let me know in the comments below who you think will make the cut. All right, let's get started. Kicking off our list at number 10 is Herbert Hoover. When you think of Hoover, one thing probably comes to mind: the Great Depression. Taking office in 1929, just months before the stock market crash, Hoover's presidency is forever linked with that economic catastrophe. His core belief in rugged individualism and a limited role for government meant he was reluctant to provide direct federal relief to the millions of Americans who were suffering. He did initiate some public works projects, like the famous Hoover Dam, but his response was widely seen as too little, too late. The Hoovervilles, shantytowns of the homeless and unemployed, became a bitter symbol of his perceived indifference. While it's not entirely fair to blame him for causing the Depression, his failure to adequately respond to the crisis certainly made a bad situation much worse, cementing his place on our list. Coming in at number 9, we have Richard Nixon. Nixon's presidency is a classic story of great ambition and a tragic fall from grace. On one hand, he had some significant foreign policy achievements, like opening relations with China and establishing the Environmental Protection Agency. But all of that is completely overshadowed by one word: Watergate. The scandal wasn't just a third-rate burglary, as his press secretary called it. It was a systematic abuse of presidential power, involving break-ins, illegal surveillance, and a massive cover-up that went all the way to the top. When the truth came out, it shattered the American people's faith in the government. Nixon's resignation in the face of certain impeachment was a moment of profound national trauma, a crisis of leadership that left deep, lasting scars on the country's political psyche. At number 8, we're going back to the 19th century to look at Franklin Pierce. Pierce came into office during a period of intense, growing division over the issue of slavery. He was a Northerner, but he had strong sympathies with the South, a position known as being a doughface. His presidency is defined by one disastrous piece of legislation, the Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854. This law overturned previous compromises by allowing settlers in new territories to decide for themselves whether to allow slavery. The result was chaos. Pro-slavery and anti-slavery settlers rushed into Kansas, leading to a violent period known as Bleeding Kansas, which was essentially a mini-civil war. Pierce's policy, meant to solve the slavery question, instead threw gasoline on the fire and pushed the nation significantly closer to the brink of the actual Civil War. Next up, at number 7, is Warren G. Harding. Harding's campaign slogan was a return to normalcy after World War I, and that's what people wanted. He was personally very popular, a friendly and handsome figure. The problem was, he appointed many of his unqualified friends and political allies, the so-called Ohio Gang, to powerful government positions, and what followed was a whirlwind of corruption. The most famous example is the Teapot Dome scandal, where his Secretary of the Interior was caught leasing government oil reserves to private companies in exchange for personal gain. While Harding himself wasn't directly implicated in taking money, his lack of oversight and poor judgment created an environment where corruption ran rampant. He died in office before the full extent of the scandals became public, but his administration remains a textbook example of cronyism and graft at the highest levels. Sliding into the number 6 spot is a president from the very early days of the Republic, John Tyler. Tyler became the first vice president to assume the presidency after the death of a sitting president, William Henry Harrison. The problem was, nobody was quite sure if he was actually the president or just an acting president. Tyler insisted he had the full powers of the office, but his own party, the Whigs, disagreed. They had put him on the ticket to attract Southern voters, but he constantly clashed with their agenda. He vetoed bill after bill, leading his entire cabinet, except for one person, to resign in protest. The Whigs eventually expelled him from the party, leaving him a president without any political allies. His stubbornness and political isolation rendered his administration almost completely ineffective, creating years of governmental gridlock and instability. We're now at the halfway point. What do you think of the list so far? Anyone you'd add or remove? Let me know down in the comments. Now, let's get to our top 5. At number 5, we have Andrew Johnson. Taking office after the assassination of Abraham Lincoln at the end of the Civil War, Johnson was faced with the monumental task of reuniting the nation, a process known as Reconstruction. Johnson, a Southerner himself, favored a very lenient approach toward the former Confederate states. He allowed them back into the Union with few protections for the newly freed African Americans. His policies clashed dramatically with the Republican-controlled Congress, which wanted to secure civil rights and punish the former Confederacy. This led to a bitter power struggle. Johnson vetoed crucial civil rights legislation, and Congress constantly overrode his vetoes. The conflict became so intense that he was impeached by the House of Representatives, and he only avoided being removed from office by a single vote in the Senate. His failure to lead during this critical period squandered the promise of Reconstruction and set the stage for a century of institutionalized discrimination. Our number 4 spot goes to Millard Fillmore. Much like Franklin Pierce, who followed him, Fillmore presided over a nation tearing itself apart over slavery. He was the last Whig president, and his time in office is remembered for one key event, the Compromise of 1850. While it was called a compromise, it was deeply divisive. The most controversial part was the Fugitive Slave Act, which required citizens in free states to assist in the capture and return of escaped slaves. This law was horrifying to many Northerners and abolitionists, who saw it as the federal government forcing them to participate in the institution of slavery. The act radicalized many against the South and made a peaceful resolution seem impossible. Fillmore's support for the law destroyed his political career and further fractured his own party, contributing to its eventual collapse and heightening the tensions that would lead to war. We are now in the top 3 most disastrous leaders in American history. At number 3 is Ulysses S. Grant. Now, this one is complicated. Grant was a brilliant general and the hero of the Civil War. As president, he actually had some noble goals, particularly in trying to protect the rights of African Americans in the South and crush the Ku Klux Klan. However, his presidency was plagued by relentless corruption, rivaling even the Harding administration. Like Harding, Grant was a poor judge of character and appointed many friends and associates who used their positions for personal enrichment. Scandals like the Whiskey Ring, a massive tax evasion scheme, involved some of his closest advisors. While Grant himself was personally honest, the constant cloud of scandal that surrounded his administration severely damaged public trust and undermined his own efforts to govern effectively. His 2 terms are a classic case of a great man being overwhelmed by the corruption of those around him. Our runner-up for the most disastrous president, at number 2, is James Buchanan. If you were to look up failed leadership in the dictionary, you might just find his picture. Buchanan was the president in the 4 years leading up to the Civil War, a period when decisive action was desperately needed. Instead, he dithered. As Southern states began to secede from the Union following Abraham Lincoln's election in 1860, Buchanan argued that secession was illegal, but he also claimed that the federal government had no constitutional power to stop them. He was paralyzed by indecision. He did nothing to prepare the nation for the impending conflict, nothing to stop the Confederacy from seizing federal forts and arsenals. His inaction and passivity allowed the crisis to spiral out of control, essentially handing Abraham Lincoln a nation already fractured and on the absolute brink of war. Many historians argue he is the president who could have, and should have, done more to prevent the Civil War. And here we are. The number 1 most disastrous leader in American history, by our measure, is Andrew Jackson. While he's often celebrated as a man of the people and the founder of the modern Democratic Party, his policies had devastating and long-lasting negative consequences. His presidency was marked by a ruthless expansion of executive power. He ignored Supreme Court rulings, most famously in the case of Worcester versus Georgia, which was supposed to protect Cherokee land rights. This directly led to his most infamous act, the Indian Removal Act of 1830. This policy forcibly relocated tens of thousands of Native Americans from their ancestral homelands in the Southeast to territory west of the Mississippi. The brutal, forced march, known as the Trail of Tears, resulted in the deaths of thousands of men, women, and children. This act of ethnic cleansing stands as one of the darkest chapters in American history. Furthermore, his war on the second bank of the United States destabilized the nation's economy, contributing to a major financial crisis, the Panic of 1837, shortly after he left office. For the profound human suffering caused by his policies and his disregard for the rule of law, Andrew Jackson tops our list. So there you have it, our ranking of the 10 most disastrous leaders in U.S. history. This was a tough list to put together, and I'm sure many of you have your own opinions. Who did we miss? Who would you rank differently? History is all about debate and interpretation, so I'd love to see what you think in the comment section below. Let's get a good conversation going. If you found this video interesting and thought-provoking, please hit that like button and consider subscribing to the channel for more deep dives into history. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.